If you were looking to get the RTX 3070, when it launches, now we have a new player in the game with AMD's RDNA 2 6800. So which one should you get, the RTX 3070 or the 6800? We're going to talk about the most important points for you to consider. Let's get into it. Hey guys, Tiago with Classical Technology here. Smash that like button, remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell for more content like this. We're going to be doing a lot of analysis on these new GPUs as well as other PC hardware. So let's talk about the topic at hand. I know many of you are looking to get the RTX 3070 as soon as it launches. That's going to be on Thursday, October 29th. Most likely I'm thinking around 9 a.m. or so is when it's going to go live. A lot of you are probably thinking now, do I still try to get an RTX 3070 or do I look at AMD's new RX 6800. Of course, AMD also announced a 6800 XT and a 6900 XT, but I think the 6800 is the one that most directly is going to compete with the RTX 3070. So let's talk about the main things that you should know. First, let's jump right into the most important thing that people really want to know, and that's going to be stock availability. Now, we certainly have to be very realistic about this. The RTX 3080 launch, as everybody knows, was in extreme high demand with very limited quantities, and I think the RTX 3070 is going to be pretty similar. I mean, of course, there are going to be more RTX 3070s available just because it's a cheaper GPU at an MSRP of $499, so it's certainly a GPU that's going to be produced in much greater quantities. And do remember that NVIDIA delayed the launch until October 29th from the 15th in order to give them more time to ramp up and better prepare for this launch. So we can expect the RTX 3070 launch to be just as quickly sold out as the 3080. Even if it does have a little more stock, I still think people are going to be really rabid and going for it. And that presents us with a very important question. What about AMD's RX 6800? Now, this is going to be released on November 18th, so certainly much later than NVIDIA's October 29th release of the 3070. So there is a pretty wide gap in there. So if you really need a GPU and you can actually find a 3070, I think at this point, if you find it in stock and you get it at MSRP, I don't think anybody's going to tell you not to get the 3070. But in case it's more of a difficult endeavor and you can't find a 3070, I wouldn't worry because you might want to wait for the RX 6800 to be released on the 18th anyway. And also the 6800 XT is also going to be released on this date. Of course, the 6900 XT, that's coming separately in December, but the 6800 releasing a few weeks after. I think with the stock issues, you most likely may have a hard time getting a 3070 anyway, so you'll have a chance to see how the RX 6800 launch will be. And let's be very realistic here. I don't think AMD has any extra magic that NVIDIA doesn't have in terms of stock, especially considering the hype that these GPUs are receiving now with the announcement showing just how powerful they are for the price. I think that AMD is going to be sold out just as quickly as NVIDIA was. The demand is that palpable that the people that couldn't get 3080s, they're spilling over into the 3070s. Likewise, people are now going to spill over into the AMD GPUs. Even having all of these GPUs, the demand still isn't going to be met. So we have to be realistic about that November 18th launch. I still think it's going to be very difficult to get the 6800, especially considering it comes in at a fairly decent price for the performance. And that's the second topic we're going to talk about now. The 3070 MSRP is $499. Of course, third-party partner cards most likely will be somewhere between $500 and $600 for the more high-end 3070s, and the AMD RX 6800 comes in at $579. Now, this is a good deal above the MSRP of the RTX 3070. Now, certainly on paper, this is around $80 more than the MSRP of the RTX 3070, and this is the version from AMD themselves. We can only assume that third-party GPUs will also carry some type of premium, so you could see these RX 6800 GPUs go well into the 600 something price range. So certainly it may be a little bit more expensive than the RTX 3070, and of course we're talking about the theoretical MSRP here. Of course, with all the stock issues, we know there are scalpers out there selling these GPUs for more than they should, but we have to go by the MSRP of eventually when they'll be available. Hopefully that price will stabilize. So analyzing that GPU versus the 3070 certainly is more expensive. So are you getting more for your money? And that's when we reach the performance category. Now keep in mind, The RX 6800 is not fully released. We do have 3070 data to go on. The RX 6800 has just some benchmarks from AMD themselves. It hasn't really reached the hand of independent reviewers, so we have to kind of take everything with a grain of salt until we can actually analyze it. From what we see so far, the RTX 3070 is performing pretty close to a 2080 Ti. In some games it beats it, some games it's very close by just a few minor frames per second, which is certainly a factor that a lot of people were happy about because the 2080 Ti, after all, was a $1,200 card and the mainstream top performer of last generation. So to have the RTX 3070 with such great improvements certainly is very impressive. So where does that leave the RX 6800? Now keep in mind, AMD builds this as their ultimate 1440p card. Now interestingly, AMD also compared the RX 6800 to the 2080 Ti. They didn't compare it against the 3070, as of course at the time the 3070 was not yet released, so it makes sense they're comparing it to the 2080 Ti, and in general from their benchmarks it does seem to perform a bit better than the RTX 3070 in comparison to the 2080 Ti, but certainly there could be a lot of factors here. AMD does have a little bit of software magic on their GPUs, such as some auto overclocking as well as some synergy with the new Ryzen 5000 CPUs that could certainly be affecting these results. So it may be a little bit different if you don't have a newer Ryzen 5000 CPU, so the results may be different if you don't actually have a Ryzen 5000 CPU, but in general it does seem to beat the 2080 Ti, and considering it's only around $80 more MSRP than the RTX 3070, in some cases it beats the 2080 Ti by a little bit of a bigger margin depending on the game, so it's certainly pretty close in the ballpark, and its pricing also kind of leaves room for a GPU to come in under the level of the RX 6800, maybe something in the $400 range that would maybe better compete with the 3070 and the eventual 3060. Of course, these are going to be coming in the future. It just makes sense. They want to release the bigger GPUs first, sort of the attention-grabbing, headlining GPUs that demonstrates their advancement in performance. But for now, from what we can gauge, the performance compared to a 2080 Ti, but for now, from what we can see, the performance compared to a 2080 Ti certainly seems to be a little bit more in the favor of the RX 6800. We're going to have to wait and see if this is because of the auto overclocking or the different features that AMD has sort of like clicked all the switches on this particular GPU before we can make a realistic assumption. Let's say if this was like on an Intel CPU system, is that still going to hold true, that performance difference? That's something that we're going to have to see, but overall they seem pretty close in performance. And of course, something very important to talk about as well with the 3070 versus the RX 6800. NVIDIA has been pretty dominant for a while, especially in this higher range and up for GPUs. AMD really is fairly new here. That's going to mean that there are a lot of things that NVIDIA has already proven for the last few years that are working very well. For example, like ray tracing, which they've been pushing considerably better. First generation with the RTX 20 series wasn't really that great. It really suffered in frames per second performance. But now ray tracing certainly looks a lot better. It's performing a lot better across the board with the new RTX 3000 series GPU. Not to mention DLSS, which is basically like AI for your games, giving you better performance while maintaining really good image quality. So that's something, especially the 2.0 version, has considerably improved. These are things that NVIDIA has had out and has been making incremental updates over the last few years. So we have to see if AMD is going to have any similar technology, and certainly we can expect that they're going to have bumps in the road as they try to finesse their software strategy. Something that I said in my video about the launch, the hardware seems to be getting so close now between AMD and NVIDIA that it may actually come down to not only driver optimizations, and this is an area that AMD has certainly struggled with in the past. NVIDIA has certainly had more reliable drivers for the last few generations, but it's also going to come down to how smoothly all these different software features work, and it's possible these GPUs could either win or lose the game based on the software that's implemented. For example, ray tracing. AMD has their own version of ray tracing, the DXR. Of course, NVIDIA's ray tracing is currently going to be more advanced, so we have to see if AMD is going to be able to catch up with that. And we mentioned DLSS, that's great for NVIDIA. Of course, AMD has their new memory synergy between their CPU, Ryzen 5000, and their new GPUs, but that's something that's going to be a little bit more limited in the market. Not everybody's going to have Ryzen 5000 with the new AMD GPUs. Perhaps in the future, after years of upgrades, people may have these type of CPUs that will work with the GPU, but in the beginning, that certainly will be a smaller market. market. I think a lot of people that are going to get the new AMD GPUs or RTX 3000 series GPUs most likely are going to be on either Ryzen 3000, the Zen 2, or even Intel 8th, 9th, 10th generation, maybe even like a 7700K. So not everybody will have sort of the newest CPU to take advantage of that. So to summarize, should you get the RTX 3070 or should you wait for the RX 6800? Well, if you had the budget for the RTX 3070 and you're really in the market for a GPU right now, based on the scarcity and stock issues that happened, I would advise you to try for the RTX 3070 anyway when everything's released. Try to get one for the first few weeks before the RX 6800 comes out, because there's a good chance you're going to have a very tough time at actually getting it. But if you do get one, it's still a great GPU. The performance is great. All of the benchmarks have pretty closely lived up to the hype of it being better than a 2080 Ti. Certainly, it's a very promising GPU, and it does come in at a cheaper MSRP than the RX 6800. But of course, if you can't get the RTX 3070, then I would advise you as well, if you need a GPU, stretch your budget $80 more and try to get the RX 6800, because most likely you're going to have probably a little bit better performance, even though you're paying a little bit more. And if you can get your hands on it, that's definitely the #1 priority now. Now, in an ideal world, if both were in stock, which one would you get? That's a little bit of a tougher question. That's going to depend at how well optimized the AMD drivers are. If they happen to really be good without any game or performance issues, I would say the RX 6800 actually seems like a fairly good value for the performance that you're getting if those performance gains over the 3070 sort of equal out. But for a little bit more of an increase, then we do have the RX 6800 XT, which seems like a beast of a GPU, pretty much even beating or getting close to the 3080 in a lot of cases, and the price gap isn't that big. I think it's from $579 to $649 for the 6800 XT, so that gets into a whole other realm of GPU competition. So for now, I would advise you try to get the 3070 because of stock. You may not want to miss that opportunity if you can get one. Then try to get the 6800 if you can't get the 3070, and if you can't get either, you're going to have to wait until stock normalizes itself, which according to NVIDIA most likely will be sometime in early 2021. All right guys, hope you enjoyed this video. I'm also going to do a little analysis of the 6800 XT versus the 3080, as well as the 6900 XT versus the 3090. That's going to be coming up, so make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys on the next video.